He felt his feet leave the drum as he leapt forward. For a second he was suspended in mid-air above the fence, and he was terrified he was going to come crashing down on the wrong side. But his momentum had carried him forward. He had made it over. Now the training he received from MI6 took over. Before they'd sent him to Sail Enterprises, they had shown him how to make a parachute jump. In fact, the jump had been cancelled, but he still knew how to land safely. It was a technique known as PLF, a parachute landing fall. His feet and knees were together as he plunged down the length of the fence. As soon as he came into contact with the ground, he had allowed his body to buckle, absorbing some of the impact. At the same time, he fell sideways onto his arm and shoulder, rolling over in the dirt. It still hurt him. All the bones in his body jolted together, and the breath was forced out of him, as if he'd been punched in the stomach. But when he got to his feet a moment later, he was still in one piece. His jacket was torn and his elbow was burning, but nothing seemed to be broken. There was no sign of the man with the wrong shoes. Alex scurried across to a pile of oil drums and crouched down behind them, keeping out of sight while he caught his breath. He was lucky that nobody had seen him land in the building site. He knew that moment anyone on the site noticed him, he would be frog-marched back to school and quite possibly arrested. In the distance, he could see Jasper Milvain at the podium. He had obviously made some sort of joke because he was smiling, all pleased with himself. Alex looked from one construction worker to another and saw that he had a problem. Everyone was dressed the same. They all wore protective helmets. Some even had goggles. The man he was looking for could be any one of them, and with so much equipment lying all over the place, he couldn't see all of their shoes. The man had gone. The whole thing had been a waste of time. But then Alex remembered how all of this had begun. It was the way the intruder had emerged from a plastic cabin that had alerted him in the first place. He had definitely been doing something suspicious. He hadn't wanted to be seen. So what was it? What had happened inside? Alex had no choice. He rose up and sprinted across the open ground, hoping that the building work and the visiting politician would keep everyone looking in the other way. He was lucky. He reached the edge of the cabin, a blue plastic rectangle about the size of a container on a ship. It had a door and a single window, but a blind had been drawn down, preventing him from looking inside. He tried the door. It was open. He went inside. He was in a rough office made up of a trestle table covered with charts and diagrams, a folding chair, a filing cabinet with a jug of water, an open can of Coke, a safety helmet, and an ashtray jumbled next to each other on top. At first he thought the office was empty, but then he saw the legs sticking out from underneath the table. With a sick feeling in his stomach, he hurried forward and knelt down beside the man who was stretched out on the floor, a pool of blood around his head. The man was in his 40s. He had a moustache and a tattoo of a dragon on the side of his neck. There was an ugly gash in his forehead, and this was where the trail of blood began. Alex noticed a monkey wrench lying on the floor beside him. It was easy enough to put the pieces together. The man had come in to the office for a break. He had taken off his safety helmet and opened a can of Coke. Then someone had come in and hit him hard with a heavy-duty metal wrench that must have weighed a kilogram. The man might have a fractured skull. He might be dead. But then Alex saw the rise and fall of his chest. The man was still breathing. He reached up for the jug of water and poured some of it on the man's face. His eyes flickered and opened, but otherwise he didn't move. "What happened?" Who are you?" The man couldn't focus his eyes. "Do you know who hit you?" No, never saw him come in before. Came in The man swallowed hard. Even talking was an effort. "I'll get someone to come in and look at you. But I need to know, do you have any idea where he went?" The man tried to shake his head, but any movement caused him a fresh wave of pain. Alex was about to give up and fetch help. Then he had one last thought. "What do you do on the building site?" The what? Operate the crane." "I'll be right back." The man, the crane operator, would be okay. He wasn't in any danger. But now Alex knew that his instinct had been right. Here was the proof lying semi-conscious on the cabin floor. There had been an intruder, and he was dangerous. He had already badly hurt one man, and he might well have been intending to kill another. He had to be here because of Jasper Milvain. What other reason could there be? Another question sprang into Alex's mind. What could the intruder do if he took possession of the crane? The answer was plenty. Alex burst out into the open air, and this time a construction worker saw him immediately. "Hey, what the hell are you doing here?" Alex ignored him, running back to the oil drums. From here he had a good view of both the school on one side and the crane on the other. He was too late. He could see a man sitting high above him in the compartment at the top of the crane. He was manipulating the controls quite deliberately. He lowered a second steel girder so that it was resting on the roof of the science block. It was quite a short one, no more than 5 or 6 meters, but it was solid and thick, and Alex knew that if it fell on someone, it would crush them, shattering every bone. Was that the plan? To drop it on the junior minister? But the girder was resting on the roof. Even as Alex watched, the operator released a length of cable that ran from the girder to the length of the crane's arm. The cable was loose now, no longer bearing the weight of the load. But what was he doing? Alex saw the tiny figure in the cabin high above him reach for a lever, and at once the arm of the crane began to swing towards the school. At that moment, he understood exactly what was being planned. He also knew that he had less than a minute to act. The new crane operator was going to rotate the crane until the cable became taut again. When that happened, it would drag the girder off the top of the roof, but by then the arm of the crane would be some distance away. This would give it the momentum of a pendulum. When the girder, weighing a few 100 kilograms, came free, it would swing through the air like a deadly battering ram. It would miss the crowd of school kids. They were over to one side. Instead, it would break through the fence and continue forward in a straight line along the edge of the schoolyard until, assuming that the operator had aimed it correctly, it slammed into the podium. The Right Honourable Jasper Milvain, Junior Minister in the Department for Education, would be smashed to pieces. In about 50 seconds' time, the only way anyone would be able to recognise him was by his DNA. Once again, Alex was on his feet. He was aware of the movement of the crane out of the corner of his eye, but there was nothing he could do to stop it. He had to cover about 100 metres, but he also had to make his way between 2 security guards and run the full length of the schoolyard. Before he could reach Milvain, he had to deal with his entourage, his security officers and assistants. It was almost certain one of them would stop him if they saw him coming. He was pounding through the construction site, heading away from the ruined science block and back towards the schoolyard. He heard someone shout out to him, but he had no intention of stopping. The arm of the crane seemed to be following him. He risked the briefest glance behind him and saw the cable straightening out again. All too soon it would drag the girder off the roof, turning it into a guided missile, which would swing gleefully through the air before it found its target. He reached the gate. Fortunately, the two burly security guards had their back to him. Their job was to prevent anyone from entering the building site rather than stop anyone coming out. However, one of them must have heard Alex's footsteps on the gravel. At the last moment, he turned and reached out to grab him. Alex had no choice. He couldn't stop now. He used a single elbow strike, a move he'd learnt in karate, to send the man reeling backwards, his arm completely numb. He'd done no lasting damage, but now the way ahead was clear. I hope you will all make wonderful use of the science block that is being constructed here. Alex could barely hear Milvain's voice over the sound of his own tortured breathing. He didn't dare turn around, but he could imagine the mass of steel swinging past him, finding its target. It just remains for me to say... The entire crowd, 200 students from Brooklyn, saw Alex racing across the yard towards the politician. One of them began cheering, and immediately Milvain's voice was drowned out as the rest of them joined in. The teachers looked alarmed. Alex had almost reached the podium. One of the security men reached into his jacket. It was only now that Alex realised he was probably armed. A shadow fell across Alex's face. It was as if a plane had passed overhead. Only it wasn't a plane, it was the girder. It had been dragged off the roof and it had begun its deadly arc, propelled by the arm of the crane. Alex reached the podium. Someone tried to stop him, but he pushed them out of the way, then hurled himself at Milvain, bringing him down in a vicious rugby tackle. His shoulder, which had already been hurt from leaping off the concrete truck, screamed at him. He felt something huge swing past, and for a moment the light disappeared. Then he was on the floor, tangled up with the junior minister. He heard an explosion of shattering glass and metal, followed by a terrifying creaking, and then more splintering and crashing as the entire building behind them collapsed in on itself. The girder had missed the politician, and Alex by inches, but it had continued into the library. When Alex looked up, the library was no longer there. There were 6 people in Henry Bray's, the head teacher's, study. The head teacher was sitting behind his desk. Alex was sitting on a chair to one side. On the other side of the room, handcuffed between 2 policemen, a man stood with his head lowered in shame. He hadn't spoken since he'd climbed back down from the crane. The 6th person had been sent by Special Branch. Alex hadn't been told his name. Bray turned to the man in handcuffs. "What were you thinking of, Mr. Doyle?" he had asked. At the end of the day, Alex hadn't been too surprised that it was Kevin Doyle who had tried to kill the politician. He remembered meeting the supply teacher in the corridor. He had been sweating, not because it was hot, but because he was thinking about what he was going to do. Doyle turned slowly and glared at Alex. "You shouldn't have stopped me. People like him, Jasper Milvain, are ruining this country for people like us. No books, no art, no drama. He makes the law, but he knows nothing about education. Well, I was going to teach him a lesson." Bray sighed. It was a cue for the man from Special Branch. "All right, let's get him out of here," he said. They left, taking the prisoner with them. Alex was now alone with the head teacher. "I don't really know what to say, Alex. What were you doing on the construction site?" I just wanted to have a look at the new building. I sneaked in and then I saw Mr. Doyle operating the crane and I guessed what he was going to do." "You do realise that you were trespassing? You had absolutely no right to be there and you could have been seriously hurt. All in all, given what's happened, I think it's best that we say no more about it. The press have been told that the whole thing was an accident, and if we're making sure your name is kept out of it..." And I'm happy to tell you that at least one good thing has come out of all of this. The insurance will pay for the damage, and so we'll be able to build a new library after all. He smiled to himself. Do you think we should ask Jasper Milvain to open it? No, sir. No, I don't think so either. Well done, Alex. Thank you, sir. Nobody had thanked him for saving the politician's life, but he supposed that's the way it was with modern politics. With a shrug of his shoulders, Alex turned and left.